This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
Welcome into a Monday edition of the Warm-Up on 97.3 ESPN. We got a lot to get to today. 1 hour to do it. Text board is open for you. 609-403-0973. Coming up at 1:25. Kevin Durso, 97.3 ESPN.com Flyers insider will join us because today is Phase 2 of the NHL's plan to come back to play. What is Phase 2? What does it mean to the Flyers? Also, what does it mean compared with the other sports group? We'll get into all that with Kevin Durso coming up at 1:25 here on 97.3 ESPN. And I mentioned the other sports because we had two bits of news come down in the sports world before I hit live on this microphone today. And they're from baseball and they're from football. In terms of baseball, there's a new agreement, a new offer, I should say, that baseball is hoping for an agreement on. And that is, there's a new offer from Major League Baseball to the players of 76 games. The players would receive about $989 million in salary, $443 million if playoffs are played. That is a difference of a little bit less money guaranteed in terms of the regular season, but more money guaranteed in terms of the postseason. And that Major League Baseball is trying to soften the offer by saying that when there's coming free agency, there'll be no direct draft pick compensation. So there will be no more players holding out because teams don't want to give draft pick compensation. So baseball is now counterposed with a 76-game schedule. It would technically be 75% prorated according to their salaries, whereas the 48-game option was 100% prorated. So in many ways, it's a similar offer, just money and dates in the calendar reshuffled around. Meanwhile, the NFL has come out with a proposal for protocols for clubs this morning, laying out plans for players to return to club facilities. Now, in this proposal, there are a couple things that have to be highlighted. Number one, locker rooms are supposed to be reconfigured to permit people being more socially distanced, specifically hoping for 6 feet apart. Meetings should be conducted virtually when possible. Helmets, shoulder pads, etc. should be disinfected after each game. Masks are required except when interfering with athletic activities, quote unquote. And that every team is set to give a tier system of who's allowed in what parts of the building to the NFL for each team. Also, there have no dates been set for mini camps yet, but the NFL and the NFLPA are discussing the possibility of certain players, such as rookies, veterans, who change teams and need physicals, to return to club facilities on a limited basis before June 26th. So a lot to digest there and get into. But the number one thing I want to note here is the Major League Baseball proposal to the players, again, feels like another example of these people just really don't care. They really don't care to negotiate. They really don't care to have a working relationship. They just care about, I guess it's just money, because that's what it really comes down to. At no point in time have we seen in the proposals from the owners or the players about really playing baseball. It all comes down to money. Now, according to Jeff Passan, one higher-ranking official told him today, in unknown certain terms, quote, "There will be baseball," unquote. Well, that's great. But I don't know about you, but am I really that interested in a 48-game or a 50-game season versus a 76 or 82 game? Like, yeah, we'll be happy with some sort of baseball, but I'm telling you, baseball doesn't get it. you have hockey and basketball practically jumping through hoops to get back on the court and on the ice. You have those two sports trying to find a way to make it work. The NFL is trying to do anything in their power to accommodate their players, accommodate the situation with each state, because obviously when you're making these memos and these statements and these information to the teams, these protocols, these rules, you have to do it in the context of the fact that every state has different rules themselves. So this might not be a universal application anyway for the NFL, but they're trying to do their best. They're trying to do their best, because what's the real reason why we're sitting here on June 8th without sports? It's because of a pandemic. All right? Whether we want to like talking about it or not, okay? And listen, we're a sports station. We love sports. I love sports. You love sports. But at the end of the day, we're sitting here on June 8th without sports because of a pandemic. The NBA and the NHL and the NFL seem to acknowledge that. Baseball doesn't. Baseball's out here crying over millions of dollars. The other sports are worried about protocols. They're worried about logistics. They're worried about phases. I mean, NHL's got 3 different phases to return. The NBA's got different layers to return to action. Everyone's asking about, the logistics of how you're going to have all these people in this bubble for at least 7 weeks. How you're going to get players from other places. Like, there are concerns about testing and about the impact of a player tests positive. That's all they're discussing. Baseball's talking about money. And it's the most tone-deaf thing in the world. And frankly, it's embarrassing. And it's distasteful. I understand that this is a business. I understand that the players want to get paid and the owners have to make sure that they can cover costs and all that kind of stuff. I get that. I'm not ignoring that reality. But it just comes off as totally tone deaf. The whole reason why the NBA is going to Disney World and to be isolated in the Wide World of Sports complex is because of this COVID-19 pandemic. Baseball seems to only be concerned about money. Like, don't you think, baseball, that if you're found a way to get out there and play, that the money issue will figure out itself? Or is there a bigger issue that we don't know about? Is there a bigger issue that baseball is not talking about? Because I'm genuinely curious about that. I am genuinely wondering, is there a bigger issue at hand? Because there has to be another reason why you have these players and these owners only conversing about money. We're in a world where we've been under this pandemic threat since March, right? We're in a world where 2 weeks now of protests, basically? We're in a world of a lot of issues, a lot of upheaval, a lot of things we're working through as a country and society. And these imbeciles are sitting there crying about money because they can't agree about how to bring sports back. The other 3 leagues, well, actually, let's say 4, include MLS for whatever it's worth, seem to be able to figure it out. But what is Major League Baseball and the players doing? They send each other a proposal, they leak it to the media, they let you and I talk about it because they think if they can pressure each other into making these decisions and moves, it'll get things done faster. I don't know about you, but text in at 609-403-0973. But at some point, baseball just has to get their you-know-what together. At some point, baseball has to stop being so tone-deaf and stop insulting everybody's intelligence and just have an honest conversation with each other. What is really important here? I get it, it's a business. I get it, these guys want to get paid. I get it, the owners want to make money. But at some point, someone's got to stop being tone deaf. At some point, all of this is just going to chase people away from the game. Just like the 94 lockout, the lockout in 94 ruined all of baseball's momentum up to that point, this may do the same thing. And, I was watching the Bruce Lee 30 for 30 last night, and they had the commercials for the next 30 for 30, which is about the 1998 home run chase between McGuire and Sosa. And it makes me think about the fact that it took baseball 4 years, basically, to really generate the interest they had before the lockout in 94. And it was thanks to two guys who were bashing home runs. And now looking back on it, it's a bit of a black eye for baseball, whether you depending on your position on PEDs, which is what I'm looking forward to on the 30 for 30. I'll talk about that as well. But in the meantime, it's like baseball can't learn from history. It can't, learn to not repeat the mistakes of the past. I understand there's a poor relationship between the players and the owners, but at some point, you got to grow up, guys. Seriously. Text board is open at 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation. Again, Kevin Durso will join us coming up at 125. Our 97.3 ESPN Flyers insider. Hockey is trying to come back, and they enter Phase 2 today. Today is Phase 2. What does that mean for the Flyers and the NHL and how that compares to what the other sports are doing? We'll get into that coming up with Durso coming up in about 14 minutes from now. Text board is open, though, 609-403-0973. Mike from the Villas chimes in and says, baseball is sour that people don't want to watch already. Horrible way to land more fans. Part of the problem, Mike from the Villas, is I think baseball is a bit egotistical. They have this attitude that the fans will be there no matter what. That, we're so great and our sport is so, great and it's America's pastime. And it's like they have no clue about perception. It doesn't matter what the reality is. It doesn't matter what's really going on in those discussions. It doesn't matter what's really going on in those arguments. The bigger deal, the bigger picture is that the Major League Baseball has a massive public relations problem on their hands right now. And Mike from the Villas, they don't seem to care. It's like they don't care about gaining more fans. They don't care about generating goodwill. They don't care about presenting a good face for the public. It's like their egos are so big, the only thing that'll force them to do anything is to be publicly embarrassed into it. Look what happened with the Washington Nationals. The Nationals were to cut the salaries of the minor league players for the rest of the year. And then the national players came along and they said, well, we'll make up the difference of the salaries. And then all of a sudden the Nationals ownership was like, oh, never mind, we'll pay them the full rate for the rest of the year. Like, why do you have to be embarrassed into doing the right thing? You had teams like the Oakland A's and the Anaheim Angels who were planning on furloughing all kinds of people, not paying minor leaguers, just outright releasing them. Then there was a huge public outcry about it. And a few days later, they say, okay, well, I guess we don't have to go as far as we did to be able to cover cost. If there is such a financial problem in baseball, why don't they just come out and tell everybody about it? Baseball had record revenue, gross revenue last year. Now, we don't know what the net versus the gross is in baseball because they don't really want to tell us. But we know that baseball is more than happy to show you that they had gross revenues last year and that baseball is thriving and baseball is alive and well. Well, if this pandemic is really hurting them that much, why can't they have that conversation with the players? Why can't they have that conversation with everybody? Basketball and hockey are being upfront with their players. The NFL is actually attempting to have legitimate dialogue between them and the Players Association. Baseball just doesn't seem to care. 609-403-0973. Be on the conversation here. Josh Hennig, 97.3 ESPN FM. I find it very interesting as well that when you look at baseball and what football are doing right now, like I said, football is almost to the point where they're just looking around and they're saying, hey, man, there's a pandemic going on. And in order for us to get back in the building, we need to do these protocols and have these tier systems. And it's really an elaborate setup. I was reading about it before I came on the air today about how, different tiers of people will be allowed in different parts of the building and how they want people to be social distance as much as possible. And they want people to wear, masks, whether it's cloth or whether it's PPE or some sort of shield on their mouths. They want to disinfect the facilities. They want to. The NFL, from as far as I'm concerned, is actually talking about the right thing. Is that the reason why we're not having our OTAs and our mini camps is because of a pandemic. So if we're going to get back in the building, how are we going to handle each state's situation? Because what's going on in Pennsylvania is different than what's going on in Texas. And Texas is a big state. So what happens in Dallas is not the same as in Houston. And California is a big state. What happens in San Francisco is not the same as Los Angeles. And so on and so forth. Look at one of the concerns that's going on in a state like Texas. Texas has seen an increase in positive tests in certain pockets of the state. Other pockets of the state, the positive tests are going down. So what do NFL teams do? They're trying to balance all these interests. Florida had their highest number of positive tests last week than they had in months. You thought things were getting better, but in some parts of the state, there's an escalation. Now, the reasons for that escalation, I'm not going to get into here because I really don't know all the information, and I'm not going to act like I'm some sort of expert on it. But in the meantime, baseball doesn't even care. Baseball doesn't have a care in the world about there being a pandemic, and all they care about is their stinking millions of dollars. By the way, go to 97.3 ESPN on Twitter. We got a poll up right now at 973 ESPN. I'm sure that Hunter Brody and Mike Gill will be getting to this on the Sports Bash. On Twitter, poll question. Do you even care if MLB returns this season? Yes, I love baseball. Nope, don't care. The early returns right now are 82%. Yes, love baseball. 17%. Nope, don't care. Early returns. Go check that out at 973 ESPN on Twitter. I think it's a great question to ask. Because at what point are we looking at baseball and are we just saying this is ridiculous? I'm in that camp. I'm starting to look at baseball and I'm just saying this is ridiculous. That's really where I'm at. I'm at the point with baseball where I don't even know if I'm going to be excited when they return anymore. It feels like they're just ruining every ounce of goodwill with the public. And just all they care about is money. And it's really, really sour. 609-403-0973. Got a text coming in from Colton. Colton says, baseball is losing its fans, and this was the easiest chance for them to get new fans into the sport. And here they go swinging and missing on this. Baseball missed on this one big time, and it's a joke on both sides. Colton, you're right. It really was an opportunity for them to produce some goodwill. It was a great opportunity for them to go out there and say, hey, we're going to give you sports. You haven't had sports. Let's be happy about it. On Twitter, we got a tweet from Josh Trainer at 973 ESPN on Twitter. Josh tweets, yes, I'm a diehard baseball fan. I want to see them back on the diamond despite the situation taking place. Well, that's Josh. Not this Josh. Josh Trainer. I'm Josh Hennig, 973 ESPN FM. Again, at 973 ESPN, the Twitter poll. Do you even care if baseball returns this season? It seems to be a divide to me. Because I got two texts sitting here saying, man, baseball is handling this wrong. I don't like this. Is ridiculous. But yet we got some people on Twitter. They're looking at it and they're saying, I love baseball. I want to see baseball. Currently, the voting is now 60-40. 60% yes, 40% no, that they care or don't care about baseball returning. 609-403-0973. I just find it incredible that baseball is this clueless, this numb, and this oblivious to the real world around them. It's absolutely incredibly ridiculous to me. I just don't get it. I just don't understand why baseball has to be so ridiculous. It's crazy. You got football, basketball, and hockey that are acknowledging that the world is a crazy place right now, and baseball is just totally numb to it. Oh, and by the way, for all you people who are out there talking about, what happened to, the murder of George Floyd, people are talking about the protests, the NFL, what's going on with that. For all people who have that conversation, where's the outcry about the baseball talking about it? Because baseball doesn't seem to care about that either. We're going to call out baseball for being completely numb and oblivious to the world around them on everything. I mean, these dudes argue about millions of dollars. Millions. Money that people like you and me don't even have an idea of how to wrap our minds around if that much money was in our bank account. Just embarrassing. Absolutely embarrassing. Keep text coming, 609-403-0973. Coming up next, Kevin Durso, Flyers insider. What is Phase 2? What can we expect as hockey proceeds to return this summer? And how is it a little bit different than what maybe we expected previously? Or is it in line with what we expected previously? And how does that affect the Flyers? We'll get into all that with Kevin Durso next here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app.
AV coming in. It didn't take long for the Flyers to respond to him. I think the relationship has been great from the get-go. He seems to have a good working relationship with the media, and that's never been in doubt with Alain Vigneault, who's a very personable type guy for sure. He's also the type of guy, Josh, too, around the National Hockey League that players generally over the years have said that they enjoy playing for. Yes, he's going to hold you accountable, but he is the type of guy that will be able to communicate with today's player, which I think is very, very important.
That was Scott Laughlin from SiriusXM NHL Radio on Friday's edition of the show here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get back to your text in just a bit at 609-403-0973. But to talk more Flyers in the NHL, Phase 2 starts today. What does that even mean? Well, the man who can answer that question for us is Kevin Durso, our Flyers insider. Check out all his work at 97.3ESPN.com and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. It's been covering wall-to-wall the NHL shutdown to the steps to return and everything that's going on with the Flyers. Kevin, how you doing on this Monday?
Doing well, Josh. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Before we get into specifically what is going on with Phase 2, I'm getting the sense more and more, whether it's, listening to you on different shows, whether it's listening to other people, like I had Scott Laughlin on Friday, what I'm reading online, it seems more and more like there's a lot of positivity when it comes to how people look at this Flyers team, that there's a big feeling that this Flyers team can legitimately do some big things when these teams return to the ice this summer.
Yeah, there is, and I think a big reason for it is from the clip that you played of Scott talking on Friday, which is Alain Vigneault is such a key addition to this team. It was such a night and day transformation from a coaching standpoint for this team that they got. Obviously, Alain Vigneault is a guy who holds his players accountable in a lot of ways, and I thought that was laid down from the beginning in the preseason when they played probably 3 or 4 preseason games, and right away he comes out and says, we cut half of the team just to get these veterans some more playing time because they need it. And I normally don't do this, but I had to take this step to make sure they're ready to go in October, and that happened to work wonders for this team over the course of they managed to maintain in the early going of the year. They weren't lighting the league up by any stretch, but they were maintaining that spot where they were hovering around that playoff bubble. And when they got hot at the right time, or seemingly started to get hot at the right time toward the end of the year and in the second half, They were becoming a team that nobody wanted to play, that everybody was starting to respect so much more. And it's really interesting because I've seen a lot of stuff about the awards voting is going to start very soon. All the ballots are going out. And I would be very interested to see where Alain Vigneault comes in when it comes to the Jack Adams for Coach of the Year, because he's got to be up there with a few others who have done just an incredible job. It's going to be a tough race this year because there's a lot of teams around the league that have really solid coaching. But his way of transforming this team from bubble playoff team to now one of these teams that's in the top four, going to play in the round robin, could come out of that as the number one seed in the playoffs if it all works out that way. That's something that nobody saw coming at the beginning of this year, and it was kind of a goal for maybe next season or the year beyond that. So he's been a big part of why they've been so successful, from holding the players accountable and making sure they're prepared in every game. But his way of communicating as well, it's a big deal for these players. He understands how to talk to players and get them to buy into his systems, and it's worked wonders for this team.
You mentioned about the Jack Adams Award. Just kind of a two-pronged question off of that. One, who would be the main contenders that Vigneault has to fend off to win the award? And number two, how do we differentiate? What is the best way to differentiate in hockey between how much of the impact is the coach versus how much of impact is the players on the ice?
Sure. I'll start with the first part. There's a couple within the division specifically that he's going to have to go against. The first one that comes to mind is John Tortorella. I would say he is the favorite for it, for coach of Columbus, because Columbus came into this year and had lost Artemi Panarin, had lost Matt Duchene, had lost Sergei Bobrovsky, all the free agency. No one gave that team a chance. And then as the year progressed, they lose their other top players to injury. Seth Jones was out with an injury. Oliver Bjorkstrand was out with an injury. They had two goalies that not many people around the league even knew that much about, and both of them ended up sitting out time with injury as well. And they were right on the bubble of making the playoffs. Now they're technically in the playoffs, and they were in that race for a majority of the year. So he deserves a lot of credit. Mike Sullivan for Pittsburgh deserves a lot of credit for maintaining that team and keeping them going. When you're playing without Sidney Crosby for a period and you lose a guy like Jake Gensel for half of the season and he was supposed to be out for the rest of the year, obviously the pause has changed that dynamic, but still, they were right up there too. I mean, they were 3 points behind the Flyers when the pause hit. So they're guys that come to mind. And when you think of the top teams in the league too, you think of Boston and Tampa. Bruce Cassidy for Boston and John Cooper for Tampa are always hanging around there. And in the Western Conference, Edmonton had a similar transformation that the Flyers did. Edmonton was toward the bottom of the league a year ago, and now they're coming back strong. And Dave Tippett was a new coach there that brought in a system that works, and he's a guy who has taken that and turned that team around with the talent that they have, with guys like Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl leading the way. In the NHL, the coach does have a pretty significant impact, not necessarily in the way that we all see it. You know, it's one of the topics that Mike and Bros have talked about a little bit before on Sports Bash, which is, you know, how much second guessing happens in hockey when it happens so quickly and the casual fan doesn't really see it. That's where a coach really comes in and makes an impact, because the coach does lay down all the systems work and where he wants a player to go on the ice at any given point, and how you set up your power play and set up your penalty kill and all of that. So that influence is there. It does certainly fall on the players, but that's also where the coaching accountability comes in, a coach who is able to keep his players on track, to be that guide. It was interesting to see Alain Vigneault at the beginning of his time with the Flyers talk about being that guide and not being a guy who has to be the controlling force behind it. The players are going to do the work, but you've got to guide them to do the right things to make sure that they're in a place to have success. And the coaches that I've mentioned that he's going to contend with for the Jack Adams are all ones that do that incredibly well and keep their players on track from the start of the season to the finish.
Kevin Durso joining us on the World Wakanda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN, our Flyers insider. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at Kevin_Durso. So, Kevin, as I mentioned earlier, we're entering Phase 2. It starts today for the NHL. So, what does Phase 2 specifically entail, and how is that different from the previous phase that we were in?
Well, it's different from the previous phase because the previous phase was virtually nothing at that point. Phase 1 was strictly self-isolation and staying at home and making sure that you were isolating yourself from potentially having any contact with anybody who would have the virus, to be able to prevent a return in general. So Phase 1 really didn't involve anything other than at-home workouts like weight training and things like that and anything like that, but there wasn't really much on-ice activity unless you were a player who had a very fortunate situation to be able to access private ice in some way. Phase 2 allows for that on-ice activity to get back underway and allows it to happen not only for players to get back on the ice, but allows it to happen in team facilities around the country, which is a bigger deal too. It's not going to happen today for every single team. It is happening for the Flyers. Their facility opened today, but there's other teams that are going to do this later in the week or maybe even a week from now if that's when the best time is for that. But everyone's going to slowly start to open back up to allow for it. One of the keys to phase two is that not every player on each team has to train at their home facility. So just because the Flyers facility is open does not mean the entire team has worked their way back and will be going over there in shifts to take time on the ice or time in the weight room or anything like that. There's only going to be today 6 players there. We don't know specifically the 6, but we can assume that the 6 players are ones that have stayed local throughout this process. A guy like Ivan Provorov comes to mind. He was staying in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, and that's where his billet family was when he was a junior player, and he had access to private ice during that time. So he's been skating this whole time, and it's safe to assume that he probably, upon hearing that news, worked his way down to the Voorhees area to start working out in the Flyers facility. And anybody else, I think a lot of minor league level players or players who split time between the NHL and the NHL are still in the area. I would think a guy like Joel Farabee is still around in some capacity. He's relatively local anyway, so that would be a possibility as well. So guys like that are all ones that would probably be taking advantage of this immediately. Guys like Claude Giroux and Carter Hart, who went home to Canada, are probably going to try to use local facilities that are opening up near them to start this process, and we'll come back to Philadelphia in the coming weeks when an announcement of the Phase 3, which is training camp, is much closer. So that's what Phase 2 is at this point. It's the ability to go into a practice facility, and players have the ability to do this anywhere that they want to. If they want to stay local to where they live in the off-season, they can. And if they want to come back to the area where their team plays, they can do that as well. But it's a big step for the league to just be able to start getting back on the ice after months of having all this time off and not really being able to do that very key part of preparing for gameplay again.
Now, you mentioned the fact that Giroux and Hart are in Canada. What are some of the hurdles that have to be overcome for them to eventually get back to the Philadelphia area? Because we know that for Canada, for example, they're saying, hey, if you're coming into the country, you got to get quarantined. And we know, for example, that in the NBA, what they're telling the players is part of the reason why they have the timeline they have in the NBA is because they plan on testing and quarantining everybody before they resume in Orlando. So could we expect a similar situation for the guys coming from outside the country back into the United States?
Quite possibly. There's been a couple things that are going to work around that. I don't know about players who have to go to Canada to go home as much. They would probably still face that 14-day period where they have to quarantine before they would go anywhere and do anything. For players coming back from Canada to the U.S., there is supposedly a waiver in place or an exemption in place that would allow them to make that transition to come back into the United States without having to worry about that kind of restriction of their non-essential travel. So they would be able to come back if they wanted to. But I think also Phase 2 and the timing of it and the fact that the league has already come out and said that Phase 3 probably won't start until about July 10th gives them some room to play with that current timeline of when Canada's 14-day quarantine period and the non-essential travel across the border lays for right now, which is at the midpoint of June. It's about June 21st. So if you play with that deadline and you give players 2 or 3 weeks beyond that before you say Phase 3 starts, it would give them time to be able to go back to where they would locally at that time and just focus on training at home for now. And I think a lot of players are going to take advantage of this time to just stay in their areas where they are, stay local, stay with their families. I know that one of the biggest hurdles is actually probably the players and their own families, that they don't want to leave their families for long periods of time or risk their family's health to play the game. And that's why they're trying to look at options where families can come with and not just stay local when the teams are training, but eventually go to the hub cities too and be with the team and allow the players to see their families on a regular basis while they're playing out the rest of the season into the months of August, September, and possibly even into October.
Now, you mentioned about the timing of a lot of this. I'm curious from you, because one thing I was reading this weekend was about how part of the NHL's plan is for daily testing. Do we have an idea when that daily testing would start? Is that something that comes with Phase 3 or Phase 4?
It's possible for Phase 3. It's definite for Phase 4. Phase 3, it might be something that happens every other day to start with as they try to continue to get more testing. That's one of the things that hasn't really been finalized about the whole plan yet. They are not going to require daily testing during Phase 2 as much, but they will be starting to require it on a much higher level once they get to Phase 3 and Phase 4, when it's an entire team gathered around each other, and you're looking at probably 30 to 35 players for each team gathering around and trying to get back and ready to go to play games again. By the time they get to Phase 4, they will definitely need daily testing. Phase 3 is going to kind of work its way into that timeline too, just to make sure that they are able to prevent anything from happening that would possibly shut this down. And they do believe that if someone were to test positive, if one or two players were, they don't think it would shut down the entire operation if it reached Phase 4 by that point. But you have to be preventative as best you can. I heard that the timing of doing testing would be something like they would be able to take the test in the evening, probably once all the day's activity was over, and get their results by the morning, so they knew going into the next day that they were negative and were able to go and train around the other players and play a game around everybody and not be at risk for spreading the virus per se. So that would be the timeline for that, and trying to figure out what they're just trying to figure out now are the logistics of making sure they have enough tests to do this at that time, and when they want to start the daily testing and how early they want to, because the earlier they can, the more safety they bring into it. And I know that's an issue that's sitting on the players' minds now, and it would put them at ease if they knew that there was regular testing happening much, much longer throughout this process than just Phase 4.
Now, speaking of, you mentioned about the fact if a player does test positive, one of the things that's been suggested with the NBA is that they would basically treat the player who tests positive like it's an injury. So players just not available for practice, not available for playing, he gets isolated, and that the NBA then would have a certain number of players available for teams to add or remove per player testing positive. Is that something similar that the NHL would do, which is they would say, you tested positive, go isolate, and maybe we call up or we bring in from this pool of players available?
That is definitely the case with the NHL. Right now, the number is still flexible. The latest one I've heard is probably 28 skaters and then as many goalies as you want to have. And that's for anything. It's not just in the event that a player were to test positive. It could be for any injury that comes up and a player's not available. They know that they need to have backup waiting behind these players who would be on the regular roster in the event that something like that happens. So typically, you're dressing 18 skaters and 2 goalies. Every team's going to carry at least 3 goalies just in case. Some might even bring 4 or 5 if they really feel like they need to. And to add at least 10, and it could possibly even, the number could grow from them, because right now all the other players within any organization are just kind of sitting around waiting to see where they go from here. They're being told to continue to prepare as if they're going to play, because they might be one of these call-ups or options for a call-up and to be inserted into the lineup if a player gets hurt or if a player tests positive. So you've got to, in the Flyers case, take all the guys from the minor leagues, take Morgan Frost, take Mark Friedman. For goalie, take Alex Lyon. They're still preparing, even though the AHL canceled the season, just because they might be part of the Flyers' plans whenever they have to travel to a hub city as backup in the event that something happens. So they're still preparing, too, as if their season is not over, even though they were playing in the AHL at the time of the pause, because they could be called on at any moment to fill in for an injured player or a player who would test positive. So that is definitely part of the NHL's plan as well, to have players in place in the event that something happens either by injury or if someone does test positive.
Now, just to follow up on that, and I'm asking this question because I'm generally trying to draw and paint a picture for the audience. So let's say the Flyers are a team, they go to their bubble city, Phase 3, Phase 4, and every team is told, okay, you're allowed to have 35 guys with you, right? So that might actually make it better for a team like the Flyers, for example, because of the fact that maybe your practice is more of a full-bodied practice and more bodies out there on the ice, so guys are more prepared when they do get called in to the lineup if there's an injury or a positive test.
Yeah, it would very much be like that. And it allows you to do drills in different ways, too. The more players you have, it turns it into a training camp style almost, into a regular practice, because training camps can have upwards of 40, 50 players at one time that need to be cut down to that roster size of, say, 23 or 24 that is typical in the regular season in the NHL. Now you're allowing the rosters to expand to upwards of 28 skaters, and then you're not even factoring in goalies. So, yes, you could very well have something like 35 players on the ice at one time, and 20 of them are going to be dressed and ready to play in a game on any given day, and the other 15 are going to just continue to practice and continue to get the repetition of practice and be prepared to play in any situation that they're needed. And it puts a lot of pressure on everybody else, too. It puts a lot of emphasis on being at your best because there's flexibility. They're allowed to probably bring in just about anybody they want to from that grouping and put them into a game lineup if they so choose. So someone who's not having the best week in the resumption of play may not be playing if someone else is there and is showing a little bit more. It's kind of like that. It's like that training camp vibe where players are fighting for a spot in the lineup. And it could very well come into play where someone who shows a little bit more in practice gets the shot to play in a game, which is going to go down probably outside of the round robin. It's going to go down as a playoff game, as opposed to someone who is playing in the lineup and a regular at the time of the pause. It could go a lot of ways, and you have flexibility to do that. And all the team, and it's not just the Flyers. All teams are going to have this possibility of fitting in other guys who start to show something, who step up their game and have shown that they managed to stay in great shape over the course of these last 3 months. There's a lot of factors to determining who is going to be your best combinations when the time comes. But that does provide a lot of flexibility for options to use in case you need them or in case you just want to make that choice to put someone in who you feel is playing better, even in just in practice, if it helps the team to win games.
He is Kevin Durso, our 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter, our Flyers insider at Kevin_Durso. Check out all of his work at 973ESPN.com. And as all guests, Kevin appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Kevin, appreciate your clarity here on the first day of Phase 2. I'm sure that you'll be on with all of us talking throughout the coming weeks about what is going on with the NHL, because it feels like every day is a new variable at this point.
Yeah, it does, and it's great to be talking about hockey again and starting to see that there's a finish line to all this where we can get back to watching games again and seeing these teams play, and especially seeing where the Flyers season goes, because it was just getting good at the time of the pause, and it was probably could have gotten even better. So we'll see how this crazy ride finishes.
Absolutely. Kevin, appreciate the time today.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get back to your text coming up next. 609-403-0973 here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app presented by First Bank of Sea Isle City. Welcome back into the warm-up. Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. 609-403-0973 is the text. We'll get back to your text in just a moment. By the way, we got a poll running at 973 on Twitter. Do you even care if MLB returns this season? 53.6% say yes. 46.4% say no. Ooh, getting a little tighter there. Getting a little more narrow. Sure, Mike Gill and Hunter Bird have a lot to talk about that coming up on the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, football at 4, powered by InsideTheBirds.com with Jeff Mosher. The NFL come up with these new protocols, this tier system. What does that mean for the Eagles? Well, of course, I'll be doing that coming up on the Sports Flash. All that and more, 2 to 6 p.m. here on 97.3 ESPN. 609-403-0973 is the text board. Dan from EHT checking in on our conversation with Kevin Durso. A lot of great stuff from Kevin there. Here, and Dan follows in and says, starting up hockey sounds really complicated. Well, Dan, you're right, because, hockey doesn't have the luxury of football and basketball where you can just go find a random field to, work out, run routes, throw the football around, or basketball, find an indoor court, an outdoor court, and shoot hoops. Hockey has a very specific set of circumstances they need. You need ice. You need to skate on the ice. You got to put your equipment on to skate on the ice. You got to have your stick. You got to have your helmet. You got to have your gear. Hockey's got a lot of moving parts. And between the facility, between the players, between the logistics. So it is complicated. But I think the good thing, Dan, from EHT is that hockey is implemented this phase system so they're not going to overlook those complications in their return. The NBA is doing the same thing. The NBA understands there are specific logistical complications they have to do with their return. And another reason why they're going through a tiered phase system to come back as well. So don't let the complications scare you off. There's nothing wrong with, there's nothing wrong with admitting and acknowledging what has to be worked through, what has to be done to get back on the ice or get back on the court. It's a matter of how you handle that. And whereas I believe we're seeing that hockey, basketball, and football are properly handling those pertinent issues, I don't think baseball is. 609-403-0973. Tom from the Village chimes in and says that baseball was basing this off of health concerns instead of money. I wouldn't be so sour on it. At this point, give the minor leaguers the TV time and let them play. That's from Tom in the Village. The only reason why I don't think baseball is going to do that is because, one, I think baseball owners realize that people are tuning in to see Bryce Harper and not see some random guy from Double or Triple A. We talk about Spencer Howard and Alec Baum and those different guys in the minors, but the majority of fans don't really know a ton about the rest of the minor league. That's why the KBO hasn't been this massive television sensation because, one, they're playing games in the middle of the night, and two, most fans have no idea who these players are. And if you've ever watched the telecast, you notice that they don't spend as much time talking about the game in front of them as they talk about, how it works in Korea and who they are coming to and from the game. And they have interviews, people talking about Major League Baseball, talking about players who played in the KBO versus Major League Baseball. So it's less of a traditional broadcast than it is about an information session. So, and I think you would have to do the same thing if you brought in those minor league players. And I think baseball realizes that that's not a good way to maximize their dollar. If they're looking to maximize their dollar, they need to go out there and have their players, the major leaguers, who they spend millions of dollars on, out there. And you're right. If they were arguing and debating and going back and forth about health concerns, that's one thing. And I agree with you, Tom. But the fact that they're going back and forth about money just makes you feel like they're just totally tone deaf. They don't get it. They don't seem to have a care in the world about what's going on for the rest of us in the world. I feel like hockey, basketball, and football, they get it. Baseball, not so much. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll be back here on the warm-up tomorrow, 1 to 2 p.m. on 97.3 ESPN.